"Please don't touch that suit, sir." These words, delivered with cold politeness, rang out like a slap. The silver-haired man in a worn jacket froze, his wrinkled fingers suspended a millimeter from the navy blue wool fabric. Hushed laughter rippled through the room. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers of the elite atelier seemed to amplify the humiliation, turning it into an echo that reflected off every glass display case. People in impeccable outfits, worth more than the old man's annual pension, turned away, pretending not to notice the scene, but their gazes, sliding across the perfectly polished floor, told a different story. The private showing of handcrafted classic suits had attracted Manhattan's most exclusive crowd. Exquisite drinks, soft music, and the hushed voices of people for whom price had never been an issue. The boutique manager, a young man with perfectly styled hair and a suit that fit as if it were part of his body, stepped forward whenever history needed to be explained for yet another masterpiece on display. This suit was created by a legendary craftsman from the 70s. Only 3 pieces exist worldwide, price available upon request. No one noticed how the elderly man's eyes lit up at the sight of each suit, as if he were meeting old friends, how his fingers involuntarily repeated movements as though stitching invisible fabric. In the far corner of the hall, half hidden by the play of light and shadow, stood a man in a simple but perfectly tailored gray suit. He observed the scene while slowly sipping champagne. His gaze never left the scene of humiliation. Leonardo DiCaprio, a man who had played dozens of roles, recognized something in what was happening more authentic than any script. The old man slowly retreated, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes told a story that none of the attendees even attempted to see. A story about hands that had created art, now exhibited as trophies for those who could only buy, but never create. No one knew that the next few minutes would change not just this evening, but the lives of many present. Antonio Vega had spent 63 years with a needle and thread in hand. His fingers, now knotted with arthritis, had once crafted suits for presidents, film directors, and business tycoons who understood that true luxury wasn't about the label, but about the hands that created it. In the 1970s and 80s, his name had been whispered with reverence in certain circles. But fashion was fickle, and as conglomerates swallowed up independent artisans, his small workshop had closed 15 years ago. Now, at 78, he lived in a modest apartment in Queens, surviving on memories and a small pension. When he had seen the advertisement for the exclusive showing of Masterpieces of American Tailoring at Belmont's, his heart had leaped. 4 of his creations would be there, suits he had poured his soul into decades ago. He had dressed carefully in his best remaining suit, itself showing signs of age, but still bearing the unmistakable craftsmanship that had once been his signature. The security guard at the entrance had almost turned him away until Antonio mentioned the name of an old client who was on the guest list. A small deception that felt justified. He just wanted to see his work one last time, to feel the fabric and remember when his art had mattered. These pieces represent a dying art, the boutique manager, whose name tag read Spencer, announced to the gathering of wealth. Hand-stitched canvassing, hand-rolled lapels, and fabrics sourced from mills that no longer exist. He moved with practiced grace, gesturing toward a midnight blue suit with subtle pinstripes. This one is particularly special. The craftsmanship is museum quality. Antonio's heart raced. He had made that suit in 1978 for a young film producer. 4,500 hand stitches in the canvas alone. He remembered every detail, the slight adjustment to accommodate the client's uneven shoulders, the special silk lining chosen to commemorate the man's first Oscar nomination. When Spencer mentioned that the suit was now valued at $47,000, a murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. To them, it was an investment, a collectible, To Antonio, it was his child. "Wasn't this made by that Italian? What was his name?" asked a woman dripping in diamonds, waving her champagne flute dismissively. "Vegas or Vega, something like that," Spencer replied with practiced nonchalance. "Sadly, he's no longer with us." Antonio's breath caught in his throat. They spoke of him as if he were dead. Leonardo DiCaprio recognized the old man instantly. Years ago, while preparing for The Wolf of Wall Street, his costume designer had shown him a Vega suit, explaining how it represented everything about the era they were trying to capture. Craftsmanship before greed consumed everything. Leo had done his research and knew exactly who Antonio Vega was and what he represented. The actor moved slightly closer, still maintaining his distance. He watched as Antonio approached the midnight blue suit, his hands trembling, not with age, but with emotion. The moment Spencer intercepted the old tailor, stopping him from touching his own creation, something shifted in the room. The crowd's reaction, the snickers, the averted gazes, the silent complicity in this small cruelty reminded Leo of everything he fought against in his environmental activism. The casual disposal of precious things, the disregard for legacy, the worship of status over substance. Spencer was now guiding a group of potential buyers toward the next display, his voice carrying across the marble floors. "And here we have perhaps the most valuable piece in our collection, worn once to the Academy Awards in 1985. No one noticed Leo setting down his champagne glass or the deliberate way he straightened his tie. No one except Antonio, whose eyes briefly met the actors across the room. In that moment, a connection formed between two men who understood the value of things that couldn't be priced: authenticity, integrity, and respect for craftsmanship that had nearly vanished from the world. Spencer's voice had the practiced precision of someone who had mastered the vocabulary of luxury without understanding its soul. The hand-rolled lapels on this piece show exceptional control. Notice how the roll creates a perfect three-dimensional effect. He gestured to a charcoal gray suit displayed on a custom mannequin. This level of craftsmanship is virtually extinct today. Antonio couldn't help himself. The lapel roll is achieved by using a slightly larger piece of canvas in the chest, hand-stitched to create tension along the edge, he said, his voice soft but carrying in the hushed room. The key is in the placement of the stitches, not visible, but you can feel them with your fingers. The room fell silent. Spencer's smile remained fixed, but his eyes narrowed. "Sir, are you in the industry?" "He was," came a voice from behind the group. Heads turned to see Leonardo DiCaprio approaching with unhurried confidence. "That's Antonio Vega." The actor extended his hand to the tailor, his smile genuine. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Vega. Your work has influenced generations." A murmur swept through the crowd. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, discreetly capturing the moment. Spencer's expression flickered between confusion and alarm as he processed this unexpected development. The wealthy clients, moments ago dismissive of the old man, suddenly reassessed him through new eyes. "Mr. DiCaprio," Spencer recovered quickly, stepping forward with an ingratiating smile. "I didn't realize you were acquainted with Mr. Vega's work. How wonderful." "Anyone who appreciates true craftsmanship should know his name," Leo replied, his tone pleasant, but with an undercurrent of steel. "After all, we're literally surrounded by his life's work." He gestured to the displays around them. "Aren't we, Mr. Vega?" Antonio stood straighter now, years seeming to fall away from his shoulders. "Yes," he confirmed, his voice stronger. "I made that one in 1978. He pointed to the midnight blue suit. "And that charcoal piece in 1982 for a senator. The green wool dinner jacket was for a Broadway producer's wedding." The diamond-adorned woman who had earlier dismissed him now blinked in surprise. "You're actually the creator? The original designer?" "Not designer," Antonio corrected gently. "Tailor. I didn't just design, I cut, I basted, I stitched. These hands, he held them up, weathered and veined, knew every thread. Leonardo watched the crowd's reaction with quiet satisfaction. The atmosphere in the room had transformed. There was curiosity now, even a tentative respect forming in the faces around them. He had seen this before in his environmental work, how people needed to be reminded of the human stories behind abstract concepts like craftsmanship or conservation. Spencer, however, was visibly calculating the potential disruption to his carefully orchestrated event. "How fascinating," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Perhaps, Mr. Vega, you'd care to join me in my office for a coffee while our clients continue their viewing? I'm sure we'd all love to hear your stories afterward." "I think everyone would rather hear from the master himself as we view his work," Leonardo interjected smoothly. "Isn't that right?" He addressed the gathering directly, effectively removing the decision from Spencer's hands. The crowd, always ready to follow a celebrity's lead, nodded and murmured their agreement. Phones remained poised, capturing the moment when Hollywood royalty aligned himself with the forgotten craftsman against the slick salesman. It was a narrative too perfect to resist, the kind that spread across social media within minutes. Antonio moved toward the midnight blue suit, this time with new authority. Spencer didn't try to stop him. The old tailor's fingers, earlier hesitant, now moved with certainty as he gently turned back the cuff to reveal the lining. "See this stitching?" he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "This is what we called a honeycomb stitch. It allows flexibility while maintaining structure." His eyes twinkled as memories returned. The client, he was a dancer, needed to move freely at premieres. Leonardo stood beside him, genuinely interested. "And each suit was completely unique to the client?" "Completely," Antonio nodded. 38 measurements minimum, sometimes more. We accounted for everything, how a man stood, how he moved, even how he breathed. He looked around at the rapt faces. "A proper suit isn't worn, it becomes part of you." A distinguished older gentleman in the crowd cleared his throat. "I had a Vega suit once, best garment I ever owned. Wore it for 20 years until my son borrowed it for his graduation and lost it." He shook his head in remembered dismay. "Never found anything comparable." Spencer's smile had become fixed, his eyes darting between Antonio, Leonardo, and the crowd. What had begun as a potential embarrassment was morphing into something beyond his control. The exclusive showing, meant to feature expensive artifacts of a bygone era, was being hijacked by the very hands that had created them. Worse, Leonardo DiCaprio, whose presence had been the unofficial highlight of the event, was clearly championing the old tailor. "Perhaps," Spencer attempted to regain control, "we should continue with our scheduled program. The champagne will be getting warm." But Leonardo had positioned himself by Antonio's side, a clear statement of alliance. "I think we're all more interested in Mr. Vega's insights than in warm champagne," he said, his smile disarming, but his intention unmistakable. "After all, how often do you get to hear from a true master about his life's work?" The crowd had completely reformed now, no longer a collection of wealthy shoppers, but an audience gathered around two men who, despite their vastly different backgrounds, shared a common appreciation for authenticity. Phones continued to capture the moment, and somewhere in the room, someone whispered, "This is going viral for sure." Spencer's carefully orchestrated event was unraveling by the minute. What should have been a routine evening of flattery and high-margin sales had transformed into something unpredictable, with the momentum now firmly in the hands of an aging tailor and a Hollywood celebrity. Worse still, the phones documenting every moment meant that any misstep would be preserved and shared across the digital world within minutes. "While this is certainly educational," Spencer interjected with forced civility, "I must remind everyone that these pieces are extremely valuable and delicate. Perhaps we could admire them without quite so much handling." Leonardo raised an eyebrow. "I think Mr. Vega understands their value better than anyone, wouldn't you say?" His tone was light but pointed. After all, he literally created the value we're all admiring. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Spencer's smile tightened. "Of course, but as the current custodian of these pieces, I'm responsible for their preservation." Antonio had gone still, his weathered hands now clasped before him. "You know," he said, his voice soft but carrying in the hushed space, "I haven't touched one of my suits in 15 years, not since my workshop closed." There was no self-pity in his voice, only a simple statement of fact. To a tailor, there is no greater connection than between his hands and his work. Leonardo watched as several of the wealthy attendees shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the human cost behind their potential purchase. This wasn't just about a confrontation between an arrogant manager and an old craftsman. It was about reconnecting value to its source. "Mr. Spencer," Leonardo addressed the manager directly, "what would you say is the most valuable piece in this collection?" Spencer seized the opportunity to redirect the conversation. "Unquestionably the emerald dinner jacket." He gestured to a stunning dark green velvet piece displayed under subtle lighting. Created for Broadway royalty, worn to Tony Award ceremonies, we recently had it independently appraised at just over $60,000. "60,000, Antonio repeated quietly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I was paid $800 to make it." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a bemused wonder at the inflation of value over time. The diamond-laden woman who had earlier dismissed Antonio now studied him with fresh interest. "Did you know when you were making these that they would become so valuable?" Antonio's laugh was gentle. "Signora, I never thought of them as investments. Each was a problem to solve, a body to honor, a moment to mark." He gestured around the room. "These were not made to sit behind glass. They were made to live, to move, to dance, to hold children, to comfort widows, to celebrate victories." Leonardo stepped closer to the emerald jacket. "May I?" he asked Spencer, who could hardly refuse. The actor carefully examined the piece, then looked to Antonio. "What makes this one special in your eyes?" Antonio approached, Spencer no longer attempting to block him. The client had uneven shoulders. Many men do. See how the left padding is structured differently? His fingers hovered over the shoulder without touching it. And he carried himself with his chest forward, so the drape accommodates that posture. Antonio's voice had taken on the tone of a teacher, generous with knowledge acquired over decades. But the real magic is inside. Leonardo looked to Spencer. "Perhaps Mr. Vega could show us?" Spencer hesitated, trapped between protecting merchandise and respecting the growing sentiment in the room. "I suppose just for a moment." With reverent care, Antonio turned back the jacket's lapel to reveal the inner construction. "Horsehair canvas," he explained, "hand-stitched, never fused. It breathes with the body, adapts over time. After months of wear, it becomes a second skin molded perfectly to the wearer." His fingertips barely grazed the stitching. "These tiny stitches, we call them pick stitches, they're almost invisible, but they're what give the lapel its life, its role." The crowd had drawn closer, fascinated. Even those who regularly purchased luxury goods rarely understood the craftsmanship behind them. Phones had lowered. This was a moment to witness, not to document. "And the signature?" Leonardo asked. "I've heard every Vega suit has a hidden signature." Antonio's eyes crinkled with pleasure. "You've done your research, Mr. DiCaprio." With nimble fingers, despite his age, he gently folded back the inner breast pocket to reveal a small, elegant AV embroidered in dark green thread that matched the velvet. "My promise to the client, my name, hidden but always present." A collective murmur of appreciation swept through the gathering. The wealthy shoppers, accustomed to brandishing logos as status symbols, were visibly moved by this humble, hidden mark of true craftsmanship. Leonardo turned to Spencer, whose expression had gradually shifted from irritation to grudging respect. "You know, Spencer, I think there's an opportunity here that wasn't on tonight's agenda." "What do you mean?" Spencer asked cautiously. "These suits have a story, a living story," Leonardo gestured to Antonio, "and you have their creator here, a master willing to share his knowledge." He addressed the crowd now. "What if Belmont's hosted a series of master classes with Mr. Vega, not just selling the past, but preserving a legacy?" Spencer's eyes widened slightly as he calculated the potential. "That's actually an interesting proposition." A distinguished gentleman in the crowd nodded enthusiastically. "I'd pay good money to have my son attend something like that. The boy needs to understand what quality actually means." Antonio stood straighter now, dignity fully restored. The transformation was complete, from unwelcome intruder to honored master, from relic to resource. And as phones re-emerged to capture this resolution, Leonardo's careful orchestration of the moment ensured that what would spread across social media wasn't just another celebrity appearance, but a story of respect, recognition, and the true meaning of value. By the following morning, the video had accumulated over 2 million views. The hashtag #Vega Legacy was trending, with thousands sharing their own stories of craftsmanship overlooked, artisans forgotten, and the hollow nature of luxury divorced from its creators. Leonardo DiCaprio's Instagram post, a simple photo of himself standing beside Antonio Vega, captioned, "True luxury has hands," had become the most liked post in his feed's history. Belmont's, initially caught off guard by the social media tsunami, had pivoted with remarkable agility. Spencer, recognizing which way the wind was blowing, had personally called Antonio the morning after the event. His proposal, a series of 6 master classes titled The Vega Method, with Antonio as the centerpiece. The registration fee would be substantial, but a portion would fund scholarships for young tailors from underprivileged backgrounds. Antonio had agreed on one condition, that the participants would work with their hands, not just listen to him talk. "Craftsmanship isn't theory," he had insisted. "It's in the fingers, the eyes, the feeling of fabric, the sound of good shears cutting through wool." Spencer, to his credit, had embraced the concept completely. What had begun as a potential PR disaster had transformed into the boutique's most prestigious offering, with a waiting list that included CEOs, celebrities, and even royalty from overseas. 3 weeks after the viral moment, Antonio stood in a converted space at the back of Belmont's. Once a storage area, it now housed 8 workstations, each equipped with the tools of traditional tailoring. The first class would begin tomorrow, and Antonio had spent the day ensuring everything was perfect. The lighting, the ergonomics of each station, the quality of the materials. Leonardo had stopped by that afternoon, away from cameras and publicity. "How does it feel?" he asked, watching Antonio arrange measuring tapes with meticulous care. "Like beginning again," the old tailor replied, his eyes bright. "But this time, I'm not just making suits, I'm passing on something that almost disappeared." The impact had spread beyond Belmont's. 3 major fashion houses had announced initiatives to reconnect with their craftsmanship roots. A documentary filmmaker had approached Antonio about telling his story. Most surprisingly, 2 of Antonio's former competitors, themselves aging masters of a dying trade, had received similar opportunities to share their knowledge. A movement was building, small but significant. The emerald dinner jacket, originally priced at $60,000, had been purchased by an anonymous buyer for $85,000. The buyer, rumored to be Leonardo himself, though he neither confirmed nor denied this, had specified that the jacket should be displayed at Belmont's between Antonio's teaching sessions with a plaque detailing its history and creator. It had become not just a garment, but a symbol of a larger truth about value, respect, and the human element that no machine could replicate. On the evening before his first class, Antonio returned to his modest apartment in Queens. He moved slowly through his familiar rooms, touching the tools he had kept even after his workshop closed: the wooden pressing board, the tailor's ham, the heavy iron that no modern device could replace. For years, these had been relics of a former life. Now they would return to use. From his closet, he removed his own best suit, the one he had worn to the Belmonts event. It showed its age, as he did. Tomorrow, he would wear it again, but with alterations he had spent the week making. The shoulders restored, the lapels reshaped, the lining replaced. It would still be old, but renewed with purpose. As he laid it carefully across his bed, Antonio reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. For decades, he had created garments that made others look distinguished, successful, confident. He had remained in the background, invisible, except through his work. Now, in the winter of his life, he had stepped into an unexpected spotlight. The value of his work had always been clear to him, even when the world forgot. What Leonardo DiCaprio had done was not to create that value, but to make it visible again, to reconnect the creation with its creator, the price tag with the hands that earned it. Tomorrow, 8 students would learn that luxury wasn't something you purchased, but something created through patience, skill, and respect for materials and process. They would learn that true elegance couldn't be bought, only earned, stitch by stitch, choice by choice, moment by moment. Antonio smiled as he turned out the light. His hands, gnarled by age and work, still knew things that no computer or machine had yet mastered. And now those hands would have the chance to share their knowledge, ensuring that some things of true value would not be lost to time. In a world that too often confused price with worth, status with substance, a simple truth had been remembered. Behind every object of beauty and quality stood a person whose life had been given to its creation. And when that connection was honored, something profound happened, not just to the creator or the creation, but to everyone who witnessed it. That, Antonio realized as he drifted toward sleep, was the legacy that mattered most.